how many people do you think are going to listen to a full 25-minute piece of content that you shoved in front of them? Not many. That's why 30-second ads for the Super Bowl go for tens of millions of dollars. Obviously, Super Bowl is the biggest sports events of the year, but I like to use that as a comparison because if Pepsi could get our attention for 25 minutes every single week or multiple times a week, they would pay for that, but they can't. Podcasts gives you the opportunity to do something that a big corporation can't.
Microphone check 1 2. What is this?
You're now listening to a brand new episode of the Play Big Faster podcast.
Look what you done started. Let's go.
Welcome to another episode of the Play Big Faster podcast. We're joined in this episode by Spencer Carpenter. Spencer is the owner and CEO of a full-service podcast booking agency, Outlier. Spencer, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I hope I can bring some value to your listeners.
Oh, definitely. I was really amazed at kind of what you do, because podcasting to some may be new, but even though it's been around for a while, but the way that podcasting has been used to grow a business, that topic just fascinates me. So if you can just share with us a little bit about what you do with Outlier and how you can help businesses, we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, so I essentially help talented entrepreneurs and business professionals get booked on podcasts or launch their podcast. And the way I got there is that when I found podcast, I was listening to people giving away tons of great and free information, super motivated by it, and I'd go and look them up and see that they've got 500 followers on Instagram. Like, I thought I was listening to Richard Branson. I thought I was listening to a celebrity. And turns out that's not what the podcasting space is about when it comes to business and entrepreneurship. It's a lot of very talented people with information that can help, and they're willing to give it away for free. But because they're not a celebrity, I recognize there probably weren't services catered to helping them get out there. And while plenty of people figured it out, it's not the best use of their time to be doing podcast outreach. So that's where I come in, and I help talented entrepreneurs, business professionals, thought leaders get their word out, whether that's just for some SEO, whether they have a product launch or something like that. That's what we do.
And I love that distinction about not having to have a large social media following to start a podcast, because you may not have that verified blue check on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
You can still start a podcast. So as it relates to the actual services, because you guys also do production as well,
Mm-hmm.
tell us about that. What does production encompass?
Yeah, so it's someone helping launch their podcast, because while it's easy enough to reach out to a podcast to be on a show, if you just put the effort into building up a bio and some topics and getting your links and stuff together, most people definitely don't have the skills or time to dedicate to learning. This technological skill of recording, uploading and stuff is easy enough, but it takes time to do editing. And so almost anybody, no matter how small of a team they try to keep it, looks to either some tool or some person that's outsourced for the podcast production side of things. And so we help businesses and professionals and solopreneurs, not just with that, but also launching their podcasts and helping them understand how it's going to benefit them. Because on the surface level, especially if they've never done it, everyone just thinks, am I doing this to build up followers and then sell ads? That's what they think it is because of radio and all of that stuff. But that's oftentimes not how people are monetizing their podcast. It's a funnel, whether that is the listener is your potential customer, the guest is a potential customer or referral source, whether it's just for making you an authority in your space. These are all things that are sometimes harder to quantify than just ad revenue, but they play a big part in anybody's business. And so we help people figure out how they're going to make a podcast help grow their business.
And so let's take it back to the ABCs of podcasting. So I have an idea that I think will fill a need in the marketplace. What are some of the things that I do not need to do prior? Because we all have these missteps if we're trying to do it on our own. What are some of the mistakes that you see people make when they start on their own trying to get a podcast up and going?
Whether it's being a guest on a show or starting your own, it can't be an infomercial. If you want to start off the episode explaining who you are and what you do, that's fine. But the whole idea behind podcasts in this space of entrepreneurship and business specifically is education. you're not there to be pitching. And that's one of the great things about podcast is you don't have to be. This show, for example, is about 20-25 minutes. That's just trust building the whole time with the listener. But if you were to make a piece of content and then put it out on Instagram or Facebook and put a whole big ad budget behind it, how many people do you think are going to listen to a full 25-minute piece of content that you shoved in front of them? Not many. That's why 30-second ads for the Super Bowl go for tens of millions of dollars. Obviously, Super Bowl is the biggest sports events of the year, but I like to use that as a comparison because if Pepsi could get our attention for 25 minutes every single week or multiple times a week, they would pay for that, but they can't. Podcasts gives you the opportunity to do something that a big corporation can't. And I think that's also important because, especially for a small business, you don't have to have tens of thousands of listeners for it to be successful. I don't know about you, but if you had 200 customers in a year, you would probably have more work than you could handle, which means in terms of people that need to show up each week, you only need a few hundred to listen to your podcast that then actually convert for your entire year to be made. So that's what I like about podcasts. And that's what a lot of people come into this space. Should I do one? It's oversaturated. You only need a few hundred people to make this work for you.
So one thing that I see, there are a lot of influencers who have been around for a while and they taunt their numbers, their downloads. Like, hey, I've had 1 million downloads this year. Over the course of my career, I've had 10 million downloads. For someone who's just starting out, what is a reasonable number that they need to shoot for if the goal is monetization, maybe sponsorships?
Uh, It's hard to say when it comes to like having BetterHelp or Squarespace or someone promote be on your podcast. The industry rates range from $18 to $25 per 1,000 downloads. That's like insane to me because I understand why, but you've already built up the following if you have 1,000 people downloading your podcast. There are way better ways to monetize it. So rather than going for those big name companies that are only going to give you a little bit of money, focus on partnerships that are within your niche so that even if you can only say I have 500 people listening to my podcast, the partner knows that those are the people they need to be in front of. And then you can charge a more appropriate price for the value you're bringing to that partner. That's the way a lot of people do, especially in the business space, is by being able to build up that listenership of people in the correct niche or industry so that even if it's only a few hundred, it's the right people rather than looking at the demographics on something like a Facebook ad and seeing it's going to reach 100,000 people, but it's just impressions. It's like a billboard. If it's not the right people, it doesn't matter. So I can't remember what your original question is, so I hope that answered it, but I know that I was there in the beginning.
No problem. Yeah, I was just asking about if I'm looking at my stats and I'm saying that I only have 10 people per episode. Is that great? If I'm consistently getting 10 people that are listening per episode, should I be feeling great about myself if I'm a new podcaster?
Look, it's all about perception. If one of those 10 converted, that means you had a 10% success rate. But my background was in the music industry. I was a concert promoter for 15 years. And there were times where I spent months advertising a show that I thought was very good, and 13 people would show up to it after months of promotion. And after that means that even the girlfriends and the boyfriends and the family members of the bands playing didn't show up. So I think that anybody that can get even a few dozen people to show up every single week to their podcast is a success. If you were to try and do a live event or a meetup right now with 3 months notice, how many people do you think you could get out? You might off the bat say a few hundred, and then when you're closer to your event, you're going to realize it's a lot harder to do that than you think. This is something that allows people to show up when they want with a low barrier to entry, which allows more people to come in the door. And so, because of that, yeah, it means that some podcasts can get millions of downloads or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people coming in every single episode. But that doesn't mean that your show is a failure just because that it's not doing the same. If you get dozens or hundreds or thousands, it's a big win. It's just important to figure out how you can then turn that into something for your business.
That is so good because I think sometimes people get, oh my gosh, the term's escaping me, pod fade. You start out, you're so excited, and you may have 5 to 10 episodes and you don't see the traction. So if you're trying to gauge how long you should be in this before you consider something else, do you have a recommendation on how long somebody should work on their podcast or how many episodes they should shoot for to make sure that this is something that actually benefits their business?
When someone starts a podcast, I always recommend look at it like a year-long goal at a minimum. Because if nothing else, you then have 50 episodes or 52 episodes out on the internet forever. You got to talk to a lot of people. You got a variety, lots of shares from those guests, hopefully. But at a minimum, 6 months. I look at this like any other type of goal that you would look at. Give it its fair chance because, yeah, like many things, if you give up after only a few episodes or a few weeks, you might have been just one episode short before you saw that sale that covered the whole cost. And then at the end of the year, if you're still not at the point you want, you always have the ability to change it. You can be flexible. You could change the name of your podcast next week if you want to. You could sell it to somebody, you could change the what the show is about. Everything about a podcast is malleable. And you could start a podcast next week that just reviews the best peanut butter and jelly and bread combination. And every single week, you're doing different combinations to find the best one. It's whatever you want. And so don't let what your current situation with your podcast is define whether or not you give up or not. And there are some people that are just like, I can't spend the time on it anymore. That's fine. Or they don't want to pay for the resources. It's just not working out this quarter in the budget. I totally get that. But I don't think there's ever a reason to really stop trying if you have the ability to with this. It's just about finding what works for you and your listeners. And again, if you don't have a single listener, but you are utilizing your guest either as potential clients or referral sources, still a win. You don't ever have to have another listen.
And then the barrier to entry is so low. Literally, they make iPhones with cameras that are so great. You can run almost your entire podcast from your iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good stuff. Now, logistically, days of the week. Have you found that releasing your podcast on a certain day of the week gets you more attention or gets it out there better? Or does it just really depend on the industry that you're in?
I think consistency matters more than anything. I mean, if you think that your listeners are people that are more likely to listen to your podcast during a commute, then releasing during the week is great. But if you're doing a long form, hours long podcast, you're more likely to get someone that's listening while doing dishes or mowing the lawn or something like that. I listen to a lot of podcasts while I'm outside doing work. And so I don't want to have to stop in 25 minutes to look at a new episode. I want something that's just going to go the whole time my hands are busy. But more importantly than anything is just consistency. If you're going to release every Tuesday, don't skip, don't miss it. Don't change it to Wednesday because you were late. If you absolutely have to, you can, but consistency is more important than what day of the week or what time or getting into that, all that stuff, unless you really have a firm understanding of who your listeners are.
Going back to your actual guest, there are some models. You have different types of podcasts. You have your solo podcast, your interview podcast. Have you found that some of the podcasts that are more successful maybe have a mix, or do you have a recommendation if you're advising somebody about a podcast, whether a solo podcast or a different format may be better for their listeners?
Yeah, so I think that some people like the solo route because they can just do a 15-minute episode every day or every 3 days or something like that. I know lots of people like to start off doing one a week. And then the easier way to do more episodes is to then do a shorter solo episode. I had a client that did that. So he would do an interview each week and then a 10-minute one on Fridays because he could just record it real quick and put it out there. But he now got twice as many downloads because there was an extra piece of content going out. But it really comes back to how you want to do it. If your goal, again, is to be able to utilize someone else's platform and have them promote it, then having guests is something you really want. If you already have a big platform or you want this to be something that goes to your current clients or your current network, maybe you don't need to have guests. If the combination could definitely also be you have an interview, but then you also do a relevant specific one. I'm sorry, a weekly like relevancy ones. So if you're in finance or something, you can do an episode that goes over the economic outlook from this past week. Right now, the Fed just decided they're not going to cut rates yesterday. Now's a perfect time for someone to put out a podcast over the next couple days that is specifically talking about that if that's what their audience wants to hear. So again, it's all malleable. It comes back to what works best for you and your listeners.
So, if I were someone who decided to work with your company, what are some of the basic things that I need to have in place? Or what are some of the things that you can direct me to start doing so that I can launch my podcast?
More than anything, I'd say it's the commitment. I have lots of people that have conversations with me and we work out a full plan. They then just don't take action on it. I can help people devise how they're going to monetize their podcast in half an hour or less. It's not that hard. At least for me, I can work that out for people very easily. It's really about taking action and committing to doing it. I'd say that more than anything. And that's where my other service is getting people booked on podcasts. If starting a podcast isn't what you want to do, or you're just not ready to make that commitment to doing it every week or batch recording several a month or something like that, then go be on someone else's podcast. They're going to do all the work for you. You just have to show up and talk. That's the other great thing about being on other people's podcasts. They're paying the resources. They're paying the editor. They're paying the person to distribute it, to make the art. You just had to show up and give content, and you still get the benefit from being on that show.
It's so good that you said that. Now, and just walking it back some because people are at different stages. We love to hear about tools. Are there any Is there any software or tools that you like to use or that your clients use that may be helpful for small businesses who may have a limited budget, or somebody who's starting out and they don't want to make a huge investment, but they do want to have strong tools to get started?
Yeah, so for getting booked on podcasts, Podmatch, absolutely. Even if you're not sure if you want to do this, just go sign up. It's very cheap. You can make your whole profile. It'll walk you through creating like a profile that's good for you and put you in the right direction of having a pitch that's ready. And then you can reach out to some people. You can let people reach out to you. It's very easy. And I always suggest people do that, whether or not they want to work with a podcast booking agent. And then when it comes to podcast platforms, if you just Google search podcast editing, podcast distribution, you're going to find all the companies. Like I've got no secret tips there. They're all public. They're all out there. A lot of them do the same thing or similar things. Some focus on one tool more than the other. It's really about deciding whether or not you want to like edit within that software or that distribution company. If you want to use their form for ads, it's hard. I'd honestly say you'd really need like a comparison chart to really know all the differences, but all the resources are right there. I'd say the podcast booking ones are the ones that are a little less known because people don't know that this is a thing, that they can be on a podcast. They know they can start one. They just haven't done it. But most people don't know that they can be a guest on somebody else's. And so that's where things like Podmatch are amazing.
If you had one piece of advice to share with entrepreneurs on just how to play big faster in the podcasting space, what would it be?
Just take that action. Even if you haven't quite figured out what the name is, what you want to be, like go have a Zoom interview with a friend and say, listen, I'm trying to work out this podcast thing. Could I like practice with you and just see where it goes? I did that with some people before I started mine, which I haven't launched yet, but I started off with a friend and I think we re-recorded like 3 times. I felt really bad, but I was trying to figure it out. I was trying to see where it was going. And that was really helpful in me figuring out how I needed to proceed forward.
Sounds so good. So, if someone wanted to just reach out to you to continue this conversation, what is the best way to reach you?
Yeah, you can come to our website, www.outlieraudio.com. My Instagram the company name is the same thing, Outlier Audio. My name on Instagram is just Spencer Carpenter, and I'm on LinkedIn. I'm pretty open book. Just reach out, even if you just have a question. You don't have to be looking to work together, but if you just want some feedback, I'm always happy to give it.
Spencer, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And everyone, until next time, play big faster.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Play Big Faster podcast. Want more entrepreneurial content?
I like this.
Make sure to subscribe for future episodes.
Already subscribed.
I just clicked on it.
Don't forget to like and leave a review. Share with a friend that needs this in their life.
I think you need this more than I.
Oh, and make sure to follow Cherie on IG at Cherie Speaks. And remember to play big faster.